We recently recorded a version of Marvin Gaye's 1970s hit, Mercy, Mercy Me, probably the best known soul song about the climate. When Marvin wrote this song 50 years ago, racial justice and climate justice were united in protest. But 50 years on, it seems to me that racial justice and climate justice are operating in parallel. If either is to succeed, does something need to change?
For me, climate justice is a racial justice issue because actually many of the people that experience the worst impacts are black and brown people. So if you're thinking globally, we know that it's people living in the global south, living in countries in Africa, in Bangladesh, in parts of Asia, in the Pacific Islands. Those are the people that are experiencing the most globally. But here in the UK, again, it is the poorest communities that are experiencing the worst impacts. And when things get tough, it is poor communities that experience the worst of it, as we saw with coronavirus and the pandemic, and it will be that again. And so for me, this is a racial justice issue because it is an inequality issue, and we are Christians and we know that we serve a God of justice, and so we have got to get this thing sorted, because if we don't, it is going to be the poor people, the black people, the brown people who are going to be affected worst.
The climate crisis affects us all, but disproportionately impacts countries in the global south. It brings increased extreme weather events like floods, droughts and hurricanes. And the countries hit hardest by that are the developing ones.
For Global South, I must say it's a reality. And I'm from Dhaka, Bangladesh. It's one of the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. For us, floods, cyclones are more intense, are more frequent. After disaster, people try to cope. So in many cases, they marry off their young girl. They send off their young son to work. So they are out of school, both of them. It's not something anyone wants to do. Be a bride maybe at the age of 12, 13, and become a bread earner at the age of 8, 9, 10, which is really, really difficult.
Marvin Gaye spoke of poison is the wind that blows. Today, that poison is what we're doing to our atmosphere. Vast, energy-hungry developed economies, the pollution that brings. Many of those effects cannot be undone.
For example, loss of life, loss of biodiversity, loss of ecosystem. So in many cases, these are not to be avoided or will not be avoided.
The countries suffering don't have the resources to deal with the devastating effects. Developed nations made a promise to provide $100 billion of support for developing countries by 2020. They didn't deliver that.
These people who are suffering the worst impacts of climate change contributed least to the problem. So it's an obligation for the global leaders to come forward and act accordingly. We have been talking about climate change loss and damage for more than 2.5 decades now. Still, I would say no tangible support we have received.
And without the financial support that was promised, what will life look like?
If we do not take the action, as we from Global South, we shall be more in danger. When UN was created, some countries were not existing and now they're existing. So I believe if we do not take the action, we shall go back in the life of not existing again.
If the temperature keeps rising, there will be no mercy, only misery for millions. David Attenborough is not alone in pointing out that it's the moral duty of richer nations to help the poorer ones.
It's about justice, and justice is about making reparation for the damages that you've done. The countries from the global south who are suffering because people in the north are creating the problem, creating the pollution. And so if you're going to fix the problem, you have to use the wealth that's being created off the back of these poor countries and distribute it. So it's about redistribution of the wealth that's coming there and to uplift those countries. And so to mitigate against climate injustice, racial injustice, we have to be able to help those countries financially.
Civil rights was the fight of Marvin Gaye's time. Climate justice is the fight of our time. Racial justice and climate justice are again today merging. We know that we need to do our bit in our own lives, but we also need to put consistent pressure on our leaders to do their bit.